Good morning, everyone. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's office manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Demystifying Fixed Fields in MARC, and today's presenter, Dr. Karen Snow. Dr. Karen Snow is an associate professor and PhD program director in the School of Information Studies at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. She received her Ph.D. in Information Science from the University of North Texas and worked as a cataloger in the Rare Book Room, University Archives, and the Technical Services Department at the University of North Texas. She currently teaches beginning and advanced cataloging courses at Dominican University, both face-to-face and online. Please welcome Dr. Karen Snow and enjoy her webinar this morning. Karen?
All right, thank you, Taylor. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. All right, so let's go ahead and get started talking about fixed fields. All right, so very exciting stuff for a Thursday morning. So here's me again, as usual, for those of you all who have been attending my other webinars. Just want to show you once again my contact information in case you want to email me after the webinar. I encourage you to do so if there's anything you are still confused about or if you have a question. So today, like I said, we'll be talking fixed fields. So I want you to be able to at least identify the fixed field information in a MARC record. Once again, I'm making the assumption that you have either attended or watched the recording of the first two webinars in this series, pardon me, of cataloging webinars, especially the one on library cataloging standards. So I'm just making the assumption that you at least know what a MARC record is and know what RDA is, etc. But I'm otherwise not assuming much. Okay, I know that several of you all are, practicing catalogers, so this stuff may seem very basic to you, but I'm making the assumption that that maybe you're not, and you're just kind of here to learn a little bit more about cataloging, right? So I'm not going to assume too much here. So. And since this is quite a complicated topic, fixed fields, as most cataloging topics are, I'm only going to be able to skim the surface here. So I'm going to, we, not me, but we together are going to work on constructing some fixed field information, some just basic ones, so not everything, but just a few fixed fields for a book, bibliographic record, and the ultimate goal being you all having a better understanding of what are fixed fields, as well as their importance in the library catalog for searching and browsing. Okay, so I encourage you to go into more depth on your own. And like I said, you can email me if you have any questions there. So as always, please feel free to go to the chat area here in the webinar and type any questions, or just if you want further clarification on anything, I will be watching the chat area, so just let me know, okay, and we can talk further. Also, this PowerPoint these slides will be sent to you at some point, I guess within the next few days after the webinar as well, so you have access to this information. So okay, let's get started. Yeah. Okay, so I'm assuming that most of you all recognize something like this whenever you go to your library catalog and you perform a search in that catalog for something, you'll get their search result list. But then in addition to that, many catalogs have this kind of way to narrow your results, right? So it's kind of a faceted browse search narrowing function of the catalog, where you narrow it by a type of material, audience, language, etc., etc. So and many more things, once again, depending on the catalog. Okay, so in many cases, this information is actually being pulled from what are called the fixed fields. Okay, so it's typically not the type of information that you would just kind of search outright. It's just kind of more behind the scenes information that helps your catalog run more effectively. Okay, so even though on the surface it can be very confusing, the fixed fields, they're vitally important for your catalog. So it's important to have at least a basic understanding of them so that you will have accurate information in your catalog, right? So fixed fields are what I call a MARC thing. Okay, so we've been talking over the many months about resource description and access, or RDA for short. And RDA doesn't really refer to them. I mean, there is information within RDA about some of this information, but for the most part, we're just going to be looking at MARC documentation today to determine what to put in fixed fields, okay? So even though the values can be informed by RDA instructions. However, MARC documentation can be a little unclear on what is meant by fixed fields. So I thought I'd start off this morning just kind of defining what I'm talking about because, like I said, the documentation is a little confusing. So let's just start with the Oclc, Bibliographic Formats and Standards website. I don't know how many of you all use that or know what it is, but I have a link here at the bottom of the slide, at least to the fixed field page on this Oclc website. And it does say, at least for the Oclc MARC, okay, because there's different types of MARC, and this is Oclc MARC. Oclc fixed fields consist of elements of the MARC 21 bibliographic leader. Okay, that's an important term, the leader here. That is the 000 field in MARC, as well as the field 008. Okay, and they also lump in the control fields, they call them 001 and 005 to this. Okay, so and what Oclc does is that they like to use these mnemonic labels for the elements. So I'll kind of use those occasionally here in this presentation if you're familiar with them, but you don't have to know them necessarily, but I'll show you what those are. Okay, so that's primarily what they're talking about, and that's probably what I'm going to be talking about here this morning. Actually, mainly the 000, the leader, as well as the 008. Now, of course, moving on to the Library of Congress, MARC documentation, it's always just kind of like an info dump. I just feel like I have to, search quite a bit more on the LC website to find anything, but maybe that's just me. But once again, the link to where I am now is at the top of my slide here. Library of Congress MARC documentation, where it describes the different parts of a bibliographic record. Note how it says the three main components of a MARC bibliographic record are the leader, the directory, and the variable fields. Okay, so they don't actually use, from what I mean, they may use the word fixed occasionally here, but they don't really use like fixed fields in the way that we're going to be using them on this page. But the main entries here that we need to pay attention to are, once again, the leader. Hold on. There we go. There's my box. Okay. The leader, which we just talked about on the last slide, that's the 000 field. Then also the what are called variable control fields, or kind of what they refer to as like the 008 field, as well as those others like the 001 and 005. And this is part of what they call variable fields that do have varying content and length, but this one, let's see it say here, that doesn't contain indicator positions, these variable control fields. They're structurally different than what are called variable data fields, which is that those are the fields we've been looking at thus far. Okay, so like the 245, the 300 field, etc. Right? But these variable control fields contain either a single data element or a series of fixed length data elements identified by relative character position. Okay, if that sounds like gobbledygook to you, understandable, because it's kind of a little bit difficult to kind of process. But let me kind of break this down. So just based upon this information, I'm just going to say, for the sake of clarity, when I discuss fixed fields in this webinar, I'm primarily referring to the leader, so 000 field, and the 008 field, okay? And for the most part, they contain predetermined values, okay, that we're going to be working with, though not always. Sometimes these are system supplied information as well, like the date a record is created, for example. But they all, it's a set character positions, okay? So I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a minute. Also, for the sake of this discussion today, variable fields, those are what we've been learning about today, pretty much. So like I said, like the 245, 246, but tend to vary in content and length. All right, so fixed fields, like I said, in the two fields I mentioned, some of the codes that are provided are system supplied, and some are cataloger supplied. Those are the ones that we're going to be looking at today. Some of the information in fixed fields is redundant. Okay, so the information is both in the fixed fields as well as the variable fields. So for example, dates. Okay, so remember we've talked about in previous webinars, like the publication field at that 264. So that obviously contains dates. This one will also contain dates as well. And it's ideal that what you have in the variable fields matches what you have in the fixed fields. Okay, you don't want to have completely different information in both places, right? They should be consistent. But the fixed fields are more computer friendly. Okay, so it's easier for computer systems to process and act upon this information because it's specifically defined elements and values as opposed to strings of information, okay, which is a little bit harder for computers to process. So the strings being the variable fields. Okay, so that's why it's really important for these fixed fields to be coded. Well, first of all, just coded, period, but coded properly. All right. So first of all, thank you, Eva Stafford, for helping me out with providing some screen captures. This is not one from Eva, but I have to rely on my wonderful network of practitioners to help me out with images because I'm no longer a practitioner anymore, so I don't really have access to systems. So, but I did want to make sure that I included some images for systems that I think that you'll recognize, right? So this is Polaris. Some of you all may use that, maybe some not. I also have an image from OCLC Connection as well, in case you use OCLC. But I'm hoping this won't be radically different from what you're used to seeing. If you're used to seeing this, but this is from my former student Miranda Calhoun here in Illinois. But you can see here, I just wanted to point out a few things. This is just kind of a typical MARC RDA bibliographic record that you would find in your catalog, right, in your system, your ILS. And so first of all, we have the leader. Once again, sometimes it's coded as just 000, sometimes just referred to as the leader. In this case, it's like LDR. That's the leader information. And then the 00, so that, sorry, I wanted to make sure, the 000 field in the first little red rectangle there. And then finally the 008 there in the second rectangle. Those are all the various codes in these two Dix fields. So, and if you can imagine this, for that field we were just looking at, so let me just go back really quick. You can see how it's just like a jumble, right, of letters and numbers and spaces. Okay, and that's intentional. Okay, because these, if we just look specifically at the 008 field, you can see how there's just a bunch of numbers, then like, letter and space, and then more letters, etc. Those are the various character positions. So in the 008 field, there are actually 40 character positions, starting with some system supplied information. That's what that SS is at the very beginning here, for typically like the date the record was created, for example. So if you can just imagine this, I couldn't, I wanted this actually just one long horizontal line, but I can't really do that on a PowerPoint slide. So just kind of imagine that, if you will, just one long horizontal line of this information starting with 00 and going all the way to 39. And these are all the various, fixed fields here in the 008 field. With them labeled in their correct character positions, kind of where they're located in that field. Okay, so we'll go through some of these so you kind of know what these are. But these are labeled using OCLC mnemonics. Now, within at least some systems, right, it's just really system dependent how you can see these. But at least in Polaris, my understanding is that if you just click on like the leader or the fixed field, that 008 field, it'll come up with an interface that's a little bit more user friendly. Okay. So here I just once again pretend that I just clicked on the 008 field, and it brought up this interface where you can kind of see without having to decode that long string of numbers and letters and spaces, kind of what this all means. So you can see here, if you look kind of closely, sorry it's kind of small, but actually I have another slide where you can see this a little bit better, so I'll wait and show you that. But thank you, Eva, for this, where this time I clicked on, or at least Eva clicked on, the leader, and it came up with a similar little box, right, interface where you can actually see the meaning of all this, and drop down menus that allow you to choose the value, okay, for that particular fixed field. Here, this is what I wanted to look at. So, so here you can kind of see this a little bit better with the 008 field. So starting with that entry date, and after it, that's the character positions that I was just referring to. So 00 to 05. So 6 character positions that refer to when this record presumably was first created, right? The entry date. And then type of date in the 06, this 06 character position, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And you can see how in some of these cases, maybe we just don't include a value because it doesn't apply, right? So, and that's fine. That's fairly normal. So like where it says date 2, right? So in this particular case, this book just has a single date associated with it. So even though this does allow you to put multiple dates there depending on the situation, we just don't need it in this case. So so we don't need to fill that in. So that's the case with a lot of this stuff, is that sometimes it's just optional, so we don't need to include a value here. So that's why you see all those spaces when you look at a 008 or a 000 field, is that it's just not filled in for whatever reason. So okay, so but otherwise, yeah, you just kind of based upon the item that you have in hand, you determine kind of what applies. And this is just for books, but I wanted to point out here, let me point out the OCLC website now, and in just a minute I'll tell you about kind of the different types of fields. If you use OCLC connection, either browser or client, if you don't know what this is, don't worry about it. But I just wanted to show you a different interface for this. Client looks perhaps a little bit different, but this is the browser one on the web that includes, for a book, this is a book work form, the fixed fields that we were just looking at before, but using those OCLC mnemonics that I was talking about, like type, VL, and so forth. And what's nice about this interface is that if you click on one of these mnemonics, so like type, for example, it is hyperlinked, so it actually takes you to the OCLC MARC website. So it'll say kind of what that means and what codes you can use for it. So, but it's all the same information. It's just presented in a slightly different way. Okay, so it's fine. Now, with that said, I've just been showing you the fixed fields primarily associated with book bibliographic records, and there are going to be fixed fields that apply to really any resource. So as it says here, if you look on the top the top left-hand corner of the screen, you can see how for the 008 field at least, all materials have like these particular fixed fields, like the date entered on file, type of date, etc. And this is from the Library of Congress MARC website, by the way. You can see here how different types of resources will have some slightly different fixed fields, right? So you can see how with music in the top right-hand corner, it includes like form of composition and format of music and music parts, right? So those are the type of information that obviously would apply just to music and maybe not to books, right? So So it just will really depend on the resource that you're looking at, which fixed fields may apply. And there's going to be a lot of overlap as well, but just so you know, there may be some slightly different ones. So if you see, like for example, on these MARC websites, this long list of fixed fields, it's because not that you need to fill in all of them. They just, some may apply to some resources and not to others. Okay. So with that said, let's do let's do something here. I feel like just talking about fixed fields is not going to be helpful. So what I want us to do is actually try to populate, right, some fixed fields. Like actually go through a few of them, not all, but a few of them, and work together to code some fixed fields for this book called The Secret Token: Myth, Obsession, and the Search for the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Really great book, by the way, if you're into that. And I put information about this book in a Google document that here's, the link, at least a shortened URL that I created on this slide, but I also posted this link in the chat area if you want to follow along with me on this. But I'll also have some images on my slide here. So if you're not able to, or you don't want to go to this Google document, you should be fine. We'll be able to do this together regardless. But in case you want to just have that an easy reference to look at the information on this book, it'll be there, just kind of just more information about it as well as some images. Okay, so okay, are y'all ready to get started? Let's work on some fixed fields together. Fixed fields with me. Ready? Oh yeah, all right. I love the enthusiasm. Oh yeah. Okay, let's go for it. Okay, so first of all, other than that URL that I just gave you that gives you information on that book, here are just some direct links to either the OCLC Bibliographic Formats and Standards, that the OCLC MARC website. If you want to also kind of be helping me out with that. Once again, I'll also have some images on my slides to help us out, but and the Library of Congress MARC Bibliographic websites as well. Whichever one you feel comfortable with, use it. You should be fine. Okay, so there's that. And also you can Google those if you need to as well, in case you're not able to take this down. Okay. And this is what I want us to fill out. I'll be doing the typing here, where it's just a table that I created in Word, since I don't want this to be system specific, since you all may be using different systems. And this is what I do with my students as well, because I don't want them kind of to be thinking like about using a specific system that they may not be using at all when they graduate. So I use kind of little templates. But for those who are using OCLC, I have the mnemonic here in the first column. And then what the fixed field that's associated with it. So the name of it, so like for example, type is type of record. And then for the actual field that it's in, so type of record is in the leader, the 000 field, and in the 06 character position. Okay, so that's what all that means for each of these. And this is just a sample, right? These are not all of them. But we're going to try to get through as much as possible with the time that we have. And if we're not able to get through all of them, then you should be able to, figure it out. And maybe you can fill in the rest of it yourself. That would be awesome, right? So, and then the value, obviously, we're going to put in the final column, right? So let's do this. Let's start at the top. The type of record. Okay, so those of you all who are on like the OCLC website or the Library of Congress MARC website, you can just kind of click on the right link here. So I'll just kind of show you both, right? So if you did go to the links that I gave you before, like on the OCLC website, for example, if you look down the left-hand side, all the mnemonics are listed in alphabetical order down the left-hand side, and so you just need to find, the one that you need. like type, I believe, is like the last one in that list, and you just click on it and it takes you to this page you see at the bottom. But I have direct links here as well. Okay, so Janet's already on top of this. Janet's like, okay, I know this is language material A. Okay, so okay, but let's break this down a little bit, even though I'm not going to say whether or not I agree with you or not, but I think that's a good one. But let's talk about this. So the type of material, this helps us identify what it is, right? What it is that we have. And so the codes for books, really the main ones that we'll be looking at for books is like A, as Janet was saying, for language material, or T for manuscript language material. As you can see here, there's a bunch of other stuff that really doesn't apply. Our book, like I said, it's just a text, a nonfiction book on the lost colony of Roanoke. So it's not like music material. It's not a kit or anything like that. But on these web pages, either the LC or the OCLC website, it does give you some further information about what all this means. So, but I wanted to also point out, like for example, on the OCLC website, it tells you, where this is supposed to be. So in the leader, the 06 character position, and then also that it's mandatory, one character code that's determined by format. Okay, so oh, and Nadine, it does have maps. Okay, so that's a good point, right? So, and that's something that we need to keep in mind, that it does have maps. But I think in this particular case, what we're supposed to be looking at is kind of what is like the primary material, like what is it primarily that we're looking at. So unless it's actually like all it is a map, or like it's like a atlas or anything like that, we would just kind of focus on the primary content. And Ian, you're asking whether or not a photograph would be K. So yeah, so if you are cataloging, yeah, a photograph, let's see, that would be a two-dimensional, non-projectable graphic. Yes. Yes. Good. So once again, just think about kind of the primary content. So what I want to do is, this is just the OCLC website, just the link that I had on the previous slide is this page. It kind of has this nice handy dandy table that kind of breaks things down a little bit easier. So like, okay, if the primary content is, or the material is primarily a map, let's just say, okay, so then it says that there's two codes that you need to pay attention to, namely E for cartographic material or F for manuscript cartographic material. And when it refers to manuscripts here, manuscripts primarily being unpublished resources. Okay, so in some cases when you think of manuscript, just because it's in the word, that handwritten, right? Manuscript is actually just meaning handwritten. And in some cases that is the case, but sometimes you have typescripts, for example, that are also unpublished. So that's what it's referring to. So when we look at for books, right, the first entry here, we have two options: language material and manuscript language material. That means essentially the T is unpublished. So with that said, if looking at the book that in question, what do you all think? So do you agree with Janet that we have language material or manuscript language material? Yeah, right. So there's no indication that this is like an unpublished resource. There's right, there's a publisher name and there's all sorts of information there for those who are looking at the Google document that indicates that this is a just language material. Okay, very good. So A, lowercase a, is our answer. And I'm, obviously in the actual 000 field, we would just have lowercase a. I would, you wouldn't put language material as well. I'm just including the meaning here so that we remember what it means. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? Does that make sense so far? Everyone's still good? Okay. All right, yay. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. DESC is the OCLC mnemonic, which is for descriptive cataloging form. Okay, this is still within the leader, but it's the 18 character position, and that'll be the last of the leader ones that we're going to look at. There's more, but I'm just, once again, for the sake of time, we're going to move on. So let's look at this. Okay, so here are the two entries from, one from LC and one from OCLC. And this just tells us, the form of descriptive cataloging. That is, whether the item has been cataloged according to the provisions of the International Standard Bibliographic Description. Okay, so if y'all remember from previous webinars, ISBD, we primarily think of ISBD in terms of the punctuation marks, right? The colons and semicolons and all that good stuff that it provides. But it also does other things, but that's primarily what we for. So when we cataloged under the previous set of cataloging rules, AACR2, what we would do, ISBD was just embedded in that standard. So we just coded A for in this particular fixed field. You can see here A is AACR2. And so that's how you would know definitively that you have an AACR2 record if you have this particular fixed field coded as AACR2. But what's missing? If we're not using AACR2, what are we using? Oh no. What cataloging standard do we use for our descriptive cataloging? Okay, well, ISBD, but right, so Wendy, yes, Liza, sorry, just a flurry here. RDA, yes, we use RDA, which may or may not have ISBD punctuation in it, right? RDA does not require that. It does not. There's no code for RDA, okay? And I don't think there ever will be. It was a huge shock when RDA first was, adopted, and they just were not going to add a code for RDA, but instead, what we want to do, since we're using RDA and ISBD, as some of you all mentioned, we want to make sure that's clear if we're using ISBD punctuation. So lowercase I is what we need to include here, because it is mandatory. It's a 1-character code. And I just also wanted to point out that on the LC website, their symbol that they use for leave it blank is like the pound sign, what hashtag, I should say hashtag now because we're, in 2020 right now, or the pound sign for those of us who are a little older. Use that, but in OCLC, they use this, what's called a B/, is that symbol that you see there to represent blank. Okay, so just as an FYI, it's not saying that you need to actually put those characters into the fixed field. It's just saying leave it blank. That's their way of saying leave it blank. Okay, so good. So if you are creating an RDA record, more often than not, you are using ISBD punctuation, so lowercase I, and then in the 040 field, okay, for those of you all in the know, that's where you would actually put that you use RDA. I believe it's like subfield E RDA, if I remember off the top of my head, subfield E RDA in the 040 field to make it like clear that you are, okay, thank you, Wendy. Like I'm not going, that's how we know that it's RDA, this record is, okay, so awesome, okay, great job. Okay, let's move on to the 008 fields, which is now I'm just going to kind of take these next 3 together because they all relate to dates. So we want to pay close attention to just like the date information on our resource. And if you've already created like the 264 fields, our publication and copyright fields, for the resource, then this will be easy enough to populate these. So, so let's just start with, well, both of all of them, right? So DTST is type of date or publication status, and dates is for the actual dates, okay? So this is determined by the date information you have in the 264 fields, and sometimes other fields like notes, right? So if you do have like a reproduction or something, and that's not in the 264 fields, but you have it in the 500 note field, then that can also be used for this as well. So you can see here with this table the different codes we can use. On the right-hand side, that's for like collections and multi-part items. So I'm just going to leave that alone for now. That's for different types of things. But for what we're looking at, just single items, like it's a single book, the code's on the left. That's what we want to pay attention to. So probably the most common one, like Nadine mentioned, single date S. You're going to see that pretty frequently because if you just have a single date, you can use that. But Nadine, you're now thinking it might be T for publication and copyright, right? So if you have a clear publication and copyright, then you want to use T. Okay. So in this case, so this is probably what you're looking at, Nadine, and maybe others who are looking at the Google document. But for those who are not, if you squint really hard on the left-hand side of the page, what do you think? So if we were creating like the 264 fields for this book, okay, let's for those who are at the publication webinar, if you can think deeply, if we remember what we talked about, do we have a publication date somewhere, and do we have a copyright? Okay, so Nadine, you're saying it has a June 2019 publication date and a 2018 copyright date. Okay, so what do you all think about that? It does say the very first line on this is the title page verso. First Anchor Books edition, June 2019, and then a copyright of 2018 by Andrew Lawler. Okay. Yeah, and I'm trying to squint really hard to see if I see any other dates in there, and I'm not seeing any, unless you all can. Well, there's a 2018. Is it like underneath the copyright date, that kind of long little paragraph is originally published in hardcover in the United States by Doubleday, a division of Penguin Random House LLC, New York, 2018. But that's the original hardcover, and this is actually the paperback. So, yeah, and Angela, you're saying that the CIP, so the cataloging and publication data, has 2018, but that I believe that refers to the original hardcover first edition. So if what we have in our hand is the paperback first Anchor Books edition, then we probably need to stick with the publication date for this particular manifestation. Okay, so let me just put this up here and see if you agree. So if we were cataloging this book, and this is the publication date and copyright date, what do you all think? Because yeah, if we're just focusing on this particular publication, yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, good. Let's just go with that. Like, even if we could probably just sit here and debate this for a while. But yeah, so if this is the publication and copyright information for this particular publication, let's just go with this. And then with that in mind, okay, so we have a publication and copyright, then we need to use that lowercase t that lets us include both the publication date first and then the copyright date second. So here, let me go back. So here are just some examples from the OCLC website that just gives you some examples of this, like what this looks like, both in the 264 fields as well as in the fixed fields. So we just put lowercase t and DTST, and then in the dates, we put the publication date first and then the copyright. Okay, so Cynthia, you have a question about how would I know if the copyright date is for a hardback? And I guess you wouldn't. Okay, so let me go back really quick for those who don't have access to the Google document. So if you look right underneath that first line where it says First Anchor Books Edition 2019, it just says copyright 2018 by Andrew Lawler. So we're assuming that copyright date applies to the paperback we have in our hand. I don't. I can assume that since it's the same content that applies to the hardback as well. Yeah, but we don't know that for certain just because we don't have the hardback in front of us. Does that answer your question? I see some typing going on, so I want to make sure anyone has anything further to say. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna. Okay, so Jessica, you were saying sometimes books have a note saying that they were first published in hard. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of part of the challenge, right? With cataloging is trying to kind of separate out what is the information that applies to what I have in hand versus like previous editions. Okay, or just manifestations. Okay, so with that said, I want to take that information that we just talked about and place it into my table. Once again, with the T and DTST, the type of date, publication status for the publication and copyright dates, and then plugging in the 2019 publication date in the first, date 1 slot, and then in date 2, my copyright date. Okay, now if I just have a single date, then I would put S in the type of date publication status field, and then I would just leave date 2 blank. I would just put the publication date in the date 1 slot and then nothing in date 2. Okay, that's fairly common. All right, so great job. Let's move on. But they kind of stick in around the same type of information, our 264 field, variable field in the bib record, which tells us our place of publication. Okay, so the mnemonic in OCLC is CTRY, so for like country, and this is still within the 008 field, but we have several character positions to work with here. So already people are like, bam, I know it is, so it's New York, right? So let's look. But one thing I wanted to point out that's really important here, if you're using the OCLC website, it'll say here, this is just an example, you can see the OCLC website, but it'll have this on the LC website as well, is that you do need to use a separate website, this MARC code list for countries, to determine which code to use. Okay, so it doesn't actually have the list on these websites. So we just want to click on that hyperlink. This is that main page for that MARC code list for countries website. And it's probably easiest just to go with the name sequence if you know the name, but it's important to note that if the publication place is a city or state in the United States, then you need to find the state name. Like so many of you have already pointed out that this was published in New York, which is presumably like New York City. Then we need to find the state of New York. Okay. If it's a country in the UK, find the country name. And if it's a city or province in Canada, find the province name. Okay. So just as an example, let's just say that this book that we have was published in Toronto, and that's what it has in the 264 1 subfield A. Okay, then we would want to find the province in Canada, which Toronto belongs, in which is Ontario. So we would look and see that little code next to, in this case, the province Ontario, which is ONC. So we can just exclude the square brackets and just choose the O and C. Now, if our place of publication is Chicago, find Illinois, right? ILU, go Chicago. I never noticed this before. So there's this right under Illinois as an entry for inaccessible island. Use St. Helena. Interesting. Something new. Okay, so the last one, like if it was published in Manchester, England, you find England. Okay, so E and K. Right. Okay, so with that said, many of you all have already pointed out on the title page, even though once again there's a lot of stuff, like a lot of background image on this title page, so it's kind of a little hard to see, but it does say New York. Okay, so many of you have pointed out, if you look up New York State in this code list for countries, NYU would be the code. Okay, and it's all of in the United States at least, all of the codes should have U at the end to represent United States, and then just you change out the first two letters depending on the state. Okay, so with that said, we have NYU, New York, for this place of publication. So that was what we would put. Excellent. Moving on, illustrations. This is still within the 008 field. And we have several character positions to work with here because we can actually have up to four, and this is optional. Okay, so if there's no illustrations, then we don't want to put anything here. But we have many options here, as you can see from looking at the LC MARC website at the top of the page. So those of you all who have the Google document open, what do we have? Someone mentioned maps before, right? So we have maps. Okay, so many people are saying like A, B, Ian, you're thinking maybe F, plates. Janet's thinking maybe I, coat of arms. Huh, okay. So as it says at the very bottom of this page here, the bottom of the slide, it does say that we want to pay close attention to what's in our 300 field. So whatever's in mostly the 300B, right, and the physical description, but sometimes like Ian mentioned F, which are plates. Plates actually are mentioned in 300A, actually after the pagination. So let's take a look here. So this is the information I provided for you at the top of the screen, as well as some samples of illustrations from the book. And I'll tell you that there's no plates. This seems like the type of book that would have plates, but it doesn't actually have plates. It just has like these black and white illustrations throughout the text, and then several black and white maps. None of them are in color, which doesn't really matter here. But so in this case, I think I have a little, there's my little red circle around that to make that clear. So unless you do actually find like coats of arms or portraits or whatever, then yeah, it's fine just to use A for illustrations. Okay. Yeah. So so once again, I can have up to 4. I only have 2 here. So A and B. That's all I need. I don't need to put anything else. I just coded A and B. Okay. All right, questions about that one? Are we okay with that? Okay, excellent. Okay, let's move on to audience. This one a little bit more tricky, but kind of more or less tricky depending on the resource. So this is for target audience, only one character position, one character code. And it is optional, so you certainly don't have to include something here, but it might be helpful. So Christina, you're already on the ball here. You're thinking maybe E for adult. And here at the very top of the screen, there's the list of the various, audiences that we can choose. But yeah, Eva, it is optional, so you can just leave it blank if you just really don't want to do it. But yeah, the intellectual level of the audience, which the item is intended. And I like the, especially like the OCLC website because it goes into a little bit more detail on this one. The same with the LC. But here, this is from the LC website, just so you can kind of see, unless you're not able to look at the MARC website. This is kind of a summation of what everything means. So in this particular fixed field, I think is probably most helpful when describing juvenile materials. As you can see here, most of the codes refer to like a juvenile audience, like preschool, 0 to 5 years, primary, 0 to 8, very, very short ranges here, etc. And so yeah, so the book in question is, I would think it's like essentially like a history book, like a popular history book for a general audience. So, which would probably be more interesting to an adult, but maybe a 16-year-old who's or 15-year-old who's really interested in this topic may be interested in it. It's really not super scholarly and complicated. So I see some of you all are maybe choosing G. Yeah, so right. Oh, Amy, you're thinking maybe F. Interesting. So aimed at a particular audience, and nature of the presentation would make the item of little interest to other audiences that were specialized. So I mean, this is the type of thing. This area is, it's going to come down to some judgment. It's going to be kind of some judgment call what you feel is most appropriate for your patrons. Would be what you want to code for this one. But I would recommend maybe not choosing something that, in this case, like I think it probably would be fine for like a younger audience, but so maybe, I don't know, it depends on kind of how you typically code adults. But I'll just say I want to bring this up. Okay, so this is not secret token, by the way. This is not what we've been looking at. I just wanted to point this out, especially for those of you all who work with a lot of like juvenile materials. It's not uncommon to find on these books, like you can see my little red arrow here pointing to ages 10 and up. So sometimes it'll actually say, so if this is for ages 10 and up, let me go back here. Let's look at the various options here. So if the book itself says it's for ages 10 and up, which code should we choose? What do you all think? Yeah, this one's tough, right? So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting all sorts of codes all over the place for this one. So, once again, I mean, it's going to come down to your judgment, what you think is appropriate based upon the actual work. But in my opinion, I mean, since it's 10 and up, that pretty much encompasses both C and D, right? Pre-adolescent and adolescent and beyond, right? It's for in up, right? So it can be an adult who would be interested in this. So maybe J, right? So it's just kind of intended for use by children and young people, approximate ages 0 to 15, right? So, but the problem though, and I don't know if Sharon, if this is what you're trying, like if you want to maybe include both C and J, even though there is that temptation, you can't do it because you can only choose one code. You only choose one code. So as much as it would be nice to choose multiple codes, in that situation, I personally probably would just choose J for the 10 and up, but do what you think is best. So anyway, but going back to our secret token, I find, having read the book, I think probably G for general audience is probably appropriate for that one. Just like I said, just because it's not really a super scholarly treatment of that topic. So, but once again, use your judgment. Okay. And this can be particularly helpful, especially if your catalog allows you to limit by audience. If, let's just say, a patron comes in and they're looking for like a biography of Abraham Lincoln that's for juveniles. Okay, that's specifically for juveniles. This at least allows you to narrow down the search results so that you're not getting like all the biographies of Abraham Lincoln, but just the ones for like juveniles. Okay, so it's really helpful to code this one. So Janet, you're asking if we would check the publisher's website. Yeah, absolutely. If you have the item and you're just really uncertain about what to choose, then yeah, you might want to do a little bit more research if that would be helpful. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay, so let's continue on. We just have a few more minutes here, but we're almost done. So nature of content is one where we actually have 4 character positions allotted. In this, I have just a list here of what we can choose. And in many cases, like you saw in like the Polaris, we just have like a drop down, which we can choose. We can choose up to 4. Okay, but if we can also just leave this blank if we want to. So I'll just tell you, in this particular case, what did I say? Hold on. So it does say specifically that there is a bibliography, an index here. So we do want to make sure that we code bibliography at least. There's an option for index here in the nature of contents, but it's only if you have a work that is an index to some other work. Okay, so you would not code the index here for this in this particular instance, because this just has an index to itself. There's actually a separate fixed field for coding an index, which I didn't cover here because it wasn't time. But we would note the index in that fixed field. Instead, this one, I think just the B for bibliographic references is sufficient, and none of the other codes really apply to this one if you kind of look at it carefully. So good. So we'll just move on since that one's, I think, fairly straightforward. Let me just go back really quick. So this one, like obviously if you have like a yearbook or a thesis, you know, and encyclopedias and dictionaries, right? So just make sure you code this if you do have one of these types of resources. Make sure you code them, but there's a lot here, so obviously we could spend a lot more time on this because there's a lot. But and I like this. There's this, I guess it's fairly new. I think probably within the last 10 years, it has like this comics and graphic novels code for 6. So if you do some cataloging for like comics and graphic novels, then it'd be good to include that one. So, okay. Finally, not finally, but almost finally, literary form. This tells us if we have a fiction or nonfiction. But if we want to be more specific, we can. Like, for example, if we're cataloging a novel, you can code that F, poetry, P, etc. Otherwise, it's a good idea to code this either 0 or 1. So 0 for not fiction and 1 for fiction, not further specified. So with the information I provided for you on the secret token, what do you all think? Fiction or nonfiction? Yeah, it is not fiction. So Z, 0 for not fiction. But once again, if you can code it more specifically, that's probably a good idea. If people are specifically looking for poetry or, you know, novels, etc. Okay, and then finally, language. Okay, this tells us the language of the work because sometimes this is the only place where that's coded. If you have a work that's in multiple languages, we can use different places for that. But oftentimes, if it's just in a single language, this is where you would code that. This is where you put that information. So just like with the country of the publication information, place of publication information, sorry, we do actually have to go to an outside website. Let's look up the code for this one. But here you can see at the top of the screen some options here in case you do have something like with multiple languages. But I'll say that you can also, if you have, let's just say like an English-Spanish dictionary, and neither one is predominant, you can just choose the one that's listed alphabetically first. And that's fine as well. You don't have to put MUL for multiple languages. It just kind of depends on your system and kind of what your local policy is. But so Janet, so if it's translated, that's, since there's only one code that we can put here, then whatever language that the book is in, that's the language code you should use. Okay, and then you may, you know, want to elsewhere note the other language that it was originally in. Yeah, but for the fixed field, this language fixed field, I would say if it's in English, it was, translated, it originally was like in Russian or whatever, you would put English. Okay. So once again, we use the MARC code list for languages. Go to that outside website, find the name sequence, and many of you all have already noted this book is in English, not Middle English or Old English, but English. So E and G. Okay, so that's what we would plug in there. Okay, so whatever language it is. Okay, so with that said, I want to go back to what I said at the very beginning, okay, and kind of just take us full circle. Even though these may look confusing and contain information that's already in the variable fields, they're still important because they are computer friendly and make it easier for you to narrow your search results. So going back to what I showed you in that, whatever, the third slide or whatever, where it had like the type of material, the target audience, the language, right? So all this, I can pretty much guarantee you, is this is populated using those fixed fields. Okay, so yeah, so it's important to be accurate, and so we'll code these and also code them accurately. So okay. All right, so I hope that was a helpful kind of introduction to fixed fields. Like I said, couldn't dig too deeply, but at least it gives you a foundation. Email me if you'd like to talk further about them. Otherwise, hopefully I will see you on August 6th for our author search confusion. Let's talk about personal names and RDA and MARC webinar. Okay, hopefully I'll see you then. So I can stay for a few more minutes if you do have any questions. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for coming today and participating so much. That's fabulous. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for an informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on August 6th for Dr. Snow's next webinar, Author Search Confusion. Let's talk about personal names in RDA and MARC. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you everyone for attending and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Taylor. Thanks, Deb.